In this video, we will show you how to replace your power steering rack bellow boot on this Honda Civic. You'll have one of these on each side of your vehicle, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do, safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After completing that, we're going to have to remove the wheel. To remove the wheel, you're going to remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and we can get this off of here. Now that we have the wheel off, we have a clear view of our outer tie rod end, inner tie rod end, and our bellows boot. Now the next thing we're going to do is make our way to the jam nut in between the outer tie rod end and the inner tie rod end. We have to break the jam nut free, separating it from the outer tie rod end. It's locked in directly against there, holding everything together. The jam nut itself is a 24mm, but we're going to have to hold onto the outer tie rod end right around this flattened area with an 18mm wrench. Now while I'm holding that, I'm just using some long pliers for the jam nut. You can use a 24mm wrench if you want. For me, it's just not long enough as far as leverage is concerned. Just going to take hold of that jam nut. Now for this, I'm going to be turning it clockwise. That's going to be pulling it inward and away from the outer tie rod end. Let's just see if we can get some movement here. Yeah. There we are. Now once you have movement from that, we can continue on with the outer tie rod end mounting nut. Now to remove the mounting nut, typically you're going to find that there's a locking cotter pin in the way. We can remove that, dispose of it properly. Just going to use my cutters to get this out of here. Use a 19mm on our mounting nut. There's that. To separate the outer tie rod end stud from the steering knuckle, a couple light taps with a hammer will do, otherwise you can use a tie rod end removal tool. Now we're going to separate the outer tie rod end from the inner tie rod end. To do that, you can either hold onto the inner tie rod end with a wrench, or you can use some locking pliers. Typically locking pliers work best for this. Continuing on, we're going to turn the outer tie rod end counterclockwise to remove it. As we do so, we're going to count the amount of turns. If you need to, you can use an 18mm wrench to turn that tie rod end. 1, 2, and so on. There we are. My count was 14. Your results may vary. Go ahead and take that number down. A quick inspection will set this aside. Now continuing from here, we're going to have to remove our jam nut from the area, so I'm keeping my locking pliers on the inner tie rod end. Using my 24mm for this. Remove that jam nut. There's that jam nut. Let's remove our locking plier. Continuing on, we're going to start removing the power steering bellow boot from the inner tie rod end and the power steering rack. As far as this area, you're going to find that you have a small squeezable clamp. You can squeeze on the 3 ears here, squeeze them together, and we'll slide the clamp out of place. After that, we'll just break that free from that inner tie rod end, and we'll have to make our way up along the top of the bellow boot for the next clamp, which is located up along the top there. For that one, it's just a single time use, so you just want to break it free. Small angled pick to break this free. Just be careful for any sharp areas. Now for that inboard clamp, I'm just going to use a long pry bar and a hammer to tap it out of place. As I mentioned, this is a single time use clamp, so we're just going to break it. Set that aside for recycling. Now we can take hold of our power steering bellow boot and remove it from the power steering rack and the inner tie rod end. Just give it a little twist, pull it out and away. There it is, friend. Just going to clean up that inner tie rod end, give that a close inspection. Want to make sure you don't have any movement here. Also, just go ahead and pay attention to that power steering rack along the backside. If you see any fluid coming out of there, that's a power steering rack leak, and the rack needs to be serviced. We're going to pay attention to the inner tie rod end. You can see that there's this small groove where the tip of that bellows boot is supposed to sit. So we're going to make sure we add some lubricant here. That'll help the alignment professional in the end. Okay, now it's time to install our bellow boot. We're going to take this and slide it all the way down that inner tie rod end until we get the wider diameter portion of the bellow boot over the power steering rack. Once we have this properly in place, we're going to clamp it down. Slide this right on over there. We get the shaft of that inner tie rod end making its way out the far end of the bellow boot here. Go ahead and slide that on. Now here's where we're going to have to pay special attention. Deep inside this area, we're bringing that boot around that power steering rack as I mentioned. We need to have a good seal here. Just give it a couple twists, make sure it's not rolling off in any position here. I can feel that it is properly in place. Now it's time to clamp down that inner portion. I'm going to be using a wire tie for this. I've already got it in the circular loop here, so I'm just going to slide it right on over that bellows boot. We'll get it in the proper position to hold this up against the power steering rack and snug it up. Take your time on this. If you're off by even a little bit, you might get moisture inside this area, which can be an issue. I'll use some long nose pliers to snug this up and then trim off the excess. Go ahead and dispose of that properly. Using a wire tie for this outer clamp as well. Can make that nice and tight. Perfect. Let's apply some anti-seize along the threaded portion of that inner tie rod end. Install that jam nut. Let's get a little bit of anti-seize right along the threaded portion here. Now it's time to install our outer tie rod end. When installing this, we want to make sure we turn it in the same amount of turns as it took to remove it originally. Let's get this started on. 1, 2, and so on. There we are. Let's go ahead and get this in place into our steering knuckle. We're going to bring it straight up and through and then start on our mounting nut. Once you have that bottomed out, go ahead and torque that to 40 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing we need to do is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the port that makes its way through that tie rod stud. We need to have them aligned so we can install our locking cotter pin. If it's not properly aligned, continue tightening until the very next slot is. We'll just slide that through, pin it over so there's no way this mounting nut can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. Now it's time to tighten our jam nut. We're going to hold on to our tie rod end right along that flattened area. We'll turn that jam nut counterclockwise, locking it in up against our outer tie rod end. Double check, make sure everything's properly tightened. Okay, one last inspection in this area and we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have the wheel in place, continue on to starting on each of your 5 lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel safely on the ground, and then torque each of these to 80 foot-pounds. Now I've got the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these to that 80 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you need to do is go ahead and hop in the passenger compartment, take your vehicle for a road test, listen for odd noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.